Okay, this page is exactly why we're here, because I was making a broadsheet, and we were looking for a map to put in the broadsheet, and we just thought, right, we'll put in Govan street map, and this page come up, and this is a bit of work. I think, did you do this? Bob did this, where they got people from Govan to engage with OpenStreetMap and put some data in. This is what we were working on. There had been a process in Govan over a year of a thing called the Govan Wave of Change, which was about stories about the future, and a project called The Future of Our Past, which was looking at the past. And we were thinking about how best to represent that. We ended up looking at the navigation symbols that you would have if you were in water as a way of charting and mapping, and producing this charter, which was looking at how we were kind of map people's values. That had come up in all the conversations. And the plan is with this charter was to get it out into the community as a kind of draft at first, and get people to get engaged with it, and then give feedback, and then use it as a tool to give people a sense of identity, a sense of place. So in a way it is mapping, but obviously not mapping like in this sense here. As part of the reason that we had gone to look for the map was because we wanted to put a map on the back page of this broadsheet that we were making, which would put places where you might find this charter. So you might find it in the police station. Everyone's like, imagine that. Or you might find it in Tesco's or whatever. So to try and bring a sense of identity and coherence. And we had this poem here, which is called "I'm Waiting" by a Glasgow-based, or Govan actually heritage-based sort of playwright, poet that looked as well at using Scots language and how can we map identity with language. This whole thing is a project of this Govan Folk University, and the idea behind that, they've been working for a number of years, over 5 years, 5 organisations looking at the heart of Govan and saying what can we do to bring real learning to the people of Govan, things that are meaningful and that are based on what is actually in Govan, as opposed to this externalisation of the idea that you wouldn't be good enough until you went away and did something. And there's also a big thing about connecting the two places.
Well, here we go. I'll talk for about 2 or 3 minutes on sort of a subsection of what we did. July 30th, there was an event at the Pearce Institute called Bringing Govan Together. There was storytelling, poetry, cartography using paper, and then social theatre-based mapping, where basically myself and Julia Todman in the red scarf outlined a very basic Govan map. This boundary is essentially just quite artificial. It's essentially this section here around between Govan Cross and Elder Park. You saw us kneeling on the floor with people who would wander in and out of the theatre, and based on their memories and their subjective interpretation, they would put down the streets in various places. We did have some suggestions up on the wall, difficult to read, but places of many, many things, very general. Emotions, anger, fear, hope, love, places of family, places of children, places of work, places of education, learning, partying, enjoyment. Here's a close-up of some of what we got. There's Langlands Road, there's the Davis Lee Nursing Home, Elder Park Primary School, Peary Primary, the Bowling Club. One of the neat things is we had people from sort of 11 years old to 80. So there would be layers and layers of these colored papers down, depending on what how they used that space or what their sort of primary instinct was. You'd find a place that some people would say, well, that's the Salvation Army. Well, no, it used to be the chapel. Well, no, then it was a school. Now it's disused. Okay, racing along here with the whip of time at my back. We're in the cafe at the Pearce. Kate Derrickson, who's a postdoc geographer, is now back in the States, held a session of resource mapping, where she used this base map here and some more detailed maps. We have some samples here. Tended to be largely older people sort of in their 60s and 70s who came in, had a cup of tea, sat down with Kate, and this was less sort of narrative and less subjective and more about tracking, encouraging people to name places that were resources to them, whether that was economic or social, cultural, faith. I found in our session a lot of older people did focus on church attendance and various sort of holidays as sort of key points. Now here's after several hours we have the sort of layer of places. One of the overall tendencies or difficulties was that's difficult to translate in a slideshow like this is so much of it is about conversation and note-taking. So this is sort of about generating a sort of sociality, generating a kind of collective sense of Govan. So the visual representations, the notes were taken, photographs were taken, and a lot of these images have been sent off to an experimental cartographer in New York, and we'll see what he does with them.
The other thing that we had on the day, because the whole event was about mapping resources and resourcefulness in the community, was we had a bus tour, which is a bus tour, which is to kind of make visible all the links between people. Because one of the things that a lot of folk found with these maps and the smaller maps was that they just couldn't orientate themselves on it. So we decided on a bus tour in Google Maps with the detail. But of course, from now on, it'll be an OpenStreetMap. And this was to introduce people to things in their community that maybe they didn't know existed, because there's a lot of territorialism and people just feeling nervous about going in that strange door even if they're invited. So they all got on the bus, and we had like 9 people on the first trip, 20, and then 30 by the end. And the great thing about the bus was people were like a bit nervous at first, but by the end of the afternoon they were all tourists, and they were like shouting to their friends and saying to their, come up and get on this bus and check it out. And this sort of ties into, this is from the bus, this ties into the notion as well of buses. There's other meanings about routes and ownership of routes and ways, because one of the big complaints in Govan is about public transport. And where do the buses go, and when do they go, and how does that limit people's ability to move about? And so this notion of waiting for the bus is quite funny, and kind of ties into the poem that we had on the very back of the broadsheet, which was "What Am I Waiting For?" So Martin, who was that theatre maker, he came along as well to this event. So this is another type of mapping in a way, and he asked this question: what are you waiting for of the people that were there? So they were engaging in the theatre mapping. In the hall there was a little bit of storytelling gathering in a kind of little kitchen space. There was the resource mapping, more technical, with Kate, and then across the room you could speak to Martin, and he gathered their ideas. And this also we saw as a good way of monitoring evaluation, because we're looking at alternative ways of how you can see if something has changed in a place, because the project Govan Together is about helping people to move to a place of understanding their own resourcefulness and resilience, because when you're dealing with low carbon issues in a low income community, it's not about them stopping flying because they don't fly, but how can they live the best life? And how can we inspire that in people? So these were some of the people's answers to the "what am I waiting for" question, and it just cracks me up. So it's like life replicating itself, even though we were meant to. And this is our final slide. We also did monitoring and evaluation, which got people, when they came in, instead of filling in a form, to actually stick dots on where they stayed and how they got there. And this was a really good way to begin to also get people into that map literacy process. And we want to use this a lot because the project's a year long, and we want to gather data in a simple and quick way. So people will be getting used to, the folk from Govan will be getting used to this. So I think that's our super fast run through what we've been doing. So questions, or I know you're like.
That was great, actually. That last slide, I like the "how did you get here" thing. The collecting. Could you flick it back to that? I just want to get a picture.
Oh right, okay.
I'll tweet it.
This one.
Yeah, that's the one. Yeah.
So, and if I just want to view the one slide.
So if you current slide should do it.
Okay, and you've got 30 seconds before it goes off.
Oh, I think we've exited our show. Oh, there we go.
Yeah, I mean, imagine as well, because one of the things, I'm a total map freak. I grew up with a huge Ordnance Survey map of Scotland at the end of the hall in the tenement in the West End where I was born and brought up, and just like knowing where I am has been a thing that's just come naturally to me. But when I started doing community work in 2000, and I was doing it in North Kelvin, just like on the way to Mary Hill, I remember having this huge map at our community fair in Queen's Cross, and it was very clear to me because it was huge detail, the streets and everything. And I'd have folk come over and I'd say, "Okay, right, where are we? Give a sticker, where are we?" And people would be like, and I'd say, "Oh, look, there's that park, and look, there's that, here, And it was quite a shock or a realization that that unless you really kind of get used to knowing or perceiving the world from that perspective, it is a completely foreign land to you. And just how does that then impact on notions of territorialism? Because I was saying yesterday, kids in Govan, maybe there'll be like streets, there'll be a street there, there'll be a youth club on the other side of it that does karate, but they will not go across that street because of territorialism. And they, in Govan High, they did a charting of first years what streets they would feel comfortable in it, and then by third year what streets they were comfortable in. So but how might, instead of tackling it head on, you guys shouldn't be in gangs and you should feel, how might just like educating about mapping and ownership, I like the, what is it called, yes, geospatial engagement, how about increasing just everybody's geospatial engagement, and how might that then change issues of territorialism without,
I actually went to the reshuffle events in Govan, and that's where some of the original mapping in Govan took place, and I sort of did an OpenStreetMap stall, and we went out on a day and did a bit of mapping there.
so it's you.
So it was me, but along with a few other people, and but I just wondered if you would like more, like if you want more of that, and if you want some help from OpenStreetMap people, volunteers to sort of organise a mapping day or to help some aspect of what you're doing. I don't know.
Absolutely, I think so. And one of the things that Kate had wanted to do, but she learned, a lot from the experience of that, was that those maps I've given out, she had loads of them printed, and the idea was that folk were going to...
Quite a bit larger, actually. Like.
Yeah, but these ones here, and what the plan was to train some local folk to go and to speak to their neighbours in the street and the shops and find out what, map stuff on it, and then they could give it back in and actually get a couple of quid or something for it, so there's an incentive as well, and then that would be information that we could use for our mapping. But I think what was very apparent is that actually because of where people's perception is, there's an opportunity to do more of the, I think there's an assumption that someone could just take that and they would know, and actually we've got another step to do. So I think absolutely, because it's that whole process of seeing, so I think definitely, and I mean whether it's Govan High or whether it's something voluntary, or the plan is to do a second version of the broadsheet, and that will we'll work with volunteers, and they'll go out into the community and use an appreciative approach to find out what everyone's doing, and connect everyone up, and use graphic narrative and mapping in a broadsheet to illustrate that. So absolutely.
I was going to say, just on the printed maps, there's a really good website for OpenStreetMap called Walking Papers, and you can then basically has like a QR code, so you can scan it back in, and then it appears the handwritten page, and it can appear as a backdrop in the editor, which is really nice for when people have got handwritten stuff. Right. You can then actually use that as your source. So
that would be amazing.
It's worth investigating. It's really neat.
It's a really, really neat system. So,
But I think that's the way we have to go with the OpenStreetMap. I mean, it's quite interesting in Glasgow because there's less technical involvement and stuff like that. But I think the community thing could be really good here. Even start. I mean, it's the fact is when Tim did the workshop at the Reshuffle, which is an event I have twice a year. So there's no reason why there isn't a permanent street map event at that. And you find the map through looking at the thing. And the other thing I did, I just made wee maps. It was just the outline of Glasgow, and got the kids to fill them in. Just put their favourite places in, whatever you do. It's amazing how many put the river going up and down the way. If you look at the map, it's like, the river goes across the way. But obviously, you were speaking to people who hadn't looked at a map for a long time. And I didn't correct anybody, but it was just amazing how many people put the river going up and down. But it was a good way of engaging them in actual fact that there is a map, or and you can put things on it, and you can put the river whatever way you want. You can.
I would certainly like to know. I mean, maybe there's people in the audience that know this, but what studies have been done on how, when you see the world in this way, what other things it gives you, what other transferable skills it gives you, to make the case that this is worthwhile, not just because then it's great everyone can read a map, but how does that then make, how do you then engage with the rest of the world? And Govan is unique. This is a wee bit of Govan history, because it was the only parish, I believe, in Britain that went across the north and south of a river. So Govan Parish used to extend all the way up to Hillhead, And I discovered the other day that actually it was Govan Parish Council that built my primary school in Hillhead. And that was because of the ancient history of the Kings of Strathclyde, who had their castle on the north side of the river, and they had their church and parliament on the south side of the river. So relating to what you're saying about north and south, you know, there's that thing, and how can you orientate to this way, and also how can you then orientate to the notion of, you know, the whole sort of city and bridging the river. And I thought the other day you could have a Queens and Kings of Strathclyde community 10k, and people could start and like run over the Squinty Bridge and then run round through Govan and Partick underneath the Clyde. But
well, I'm just talking about thinking of some of you mentioned about the process of this is one of the fantastic things in the theatre was people enjoyed it so much and it was so social. The difficulty of that is you get all of this wonderful data in a sense, but kind of capturing it or transferring it into something cartographical is the kind of challenge. So what Julia and I are interested in is not so much a sort of, it's the difficult thing about resources, because you might want something that actually has the value of, I hold this in my hand and I know how to get from A to B to C to D, and I'll know how far it is, and you know, when I get there that resource is available to me, etc. Versus something that's much more sort of representational. Like there was a slide earlier about it was the sort of chronology using the navigational aid sort of metaphor, and that sort of mapping, that sort of, in a sense, it's more of a sort of diagramming or charting of flows and energies, is something that interests me a lot. And I wonder from a sort of technological point of view, is that the computer as an interface, how we capture that sort of social collaborative process that may be difficult to sort of technically nail, and if it's possible with the computer, and I'm just lacking the imagination or the technical ability to do that, because as a performance studies person and a geographer who's interested in embodiment, the bodily experience, that was the sort of the fantastic thing about the theater mapping. And the difficulty that Kate had with the paper mapping is, as you pointed out, it's very difficult to relate to the sort of two-dimensional plane, and people have lived in Govan all their lives and going, I have no idea what I'm looking at, you know? I mean, this could be a map of Khartoum or Beijing, until you start to sort of tease things out.
And I mentioned yesterday when we were having that there's a lab in MIT called the Sense Able City Lab, and it's all about using IT to engage with the senses of a city and represent it. And I'm quite intrigued by that. And you know, you can pay, a city council can pay to, you know, be £40,000 a year or something like that to be part of that lab and get access to all of their. And I'm kind of on a wee bit of a campaign, like wouldn't that be amazing if we get that for Glasgow and begin to engage, because they did things like they had little carbon monitors in people's bicycles and then like that, or they looked at mobile phone usage over time, and that would be a way of really democratising this process of move to sustainability, instead of it all being like, oh, those folk up there make the decisions, and you know.
Yeah, I mean, there's guys at UCL in London are doing lots of kind of research and thinking about how do you use people's phones as devices to collect things like, Mika Hakai, who done some of the research I was talking about. He was talking about using phones because you've got your GPS. They were measuring sound levels using people's phones, so you can actually see how loud areas were, and they were using that to like look at the impact of like cars and so, you've actually with your phone, you've suddenly got a huge amount of power there as like a sensor effectively to do cool stuff.
I think it's fascinating, but I think there's a difference between, you need to keep an eye on what your end is really, what you were saying about how do you represent this cartographical. Maybe that's not really important. The main benefit that I see from this is engaging those people in the community and giving them a greater sense of place in where they live and looking back at the history and so on. By the time you've come up with some cartographic representation, that would probably be more confusing a map than the first one that they couldn't understand anyway. So I see that the mapping side of it is very much a tool of facilitating that sort of discussion. The outcome is not necessarily a map other than the mental maps within the people who have lived in Govan all their lives. So I'd be a little bit wary of aiming for some physical representation of it in a way, but use the maps to actually
Well,
get there. So I just
Yeah.
wonder what the I might have missed the beginning. The organisation you're with, is that called Govan Together?
well,
What-
the,
I'm just wondering where you come from, or what the
Yeah, well,
ultimate aim of the project is.
so it's with the Govan Folk University,
Uh-huh.
which is come out of the Pearce Institute, which is an organisation.
Yeah.
1902 it was built and given to the people out of the Govan Old and Lint House Parish Church.
Sure.
And Govan is the oldest place of worship in Glasgow. And Fable Vision, which is a community, an arts in the community theatre cultural practice organisation that's 25 years old, and the Galgale, which uses culture and boat building to engage with folk,
That's Alistair McIntosh.
which is 20 years old. And have I missed some? Oh, and the CHE, which is the Centre for Human Ecology, that has been about for 20 odd years and is now back in the Pearce Institute. And them coming together and trying to think about, well, how can we approach the job of placemaking, of identity making, in a way that is holistic and sustainable and actually is part of this beautiful world that we know we can achieve in a place where there's a lot of people that are like having a really hard time. And so it's really interesting as well, you're picking up on that process, because Fable Vision is very influenced, and that's sort of my because I'm involved in art, and by this notion of cultural planning. And that sort of came out of, it has roots in Patrick Geddes. He was a town planner and an ecologist also. He sort of influenced the Centre for Human Ecology. And this notion that you start with culture as the petri dish, you know, what everyone's live, work and play experiences, and you go in and you map it. And it's the quality of that relationship that you have as you map a community and you engage and you reflect back and you come to presence that gives you the insight for a really sustainable development. So as opposed to someone sitting in office and saying, oh, what you guys need is this or this, you go in, and one of the missions of Fable Vision particularly is to get cultural planning as the way that all planning in Scotland is done. So that's like, you know, but I'm really glad that you picked up on it, because that is my thing. I'm not so, people are really hot about oral histories and keeping hold of stuff and recording, and I'm like, actually, it's the quality of the interaction you have with the person, because if there's empowerment in that moment, then you don't need to hold on to a thing.
I think it's the empowerment of it in it, and
Yeah.
I'm conscious of this for two reasons. I've just done a series of little walk maps for Glasgow Life, and for South West Glasgow, and one of them was Elder Park. So I just think,
We need to get
how
you
do Glasgow Life,
Get
why
you.
are they not involving people in the local community in providing the data that I was using? You know,
Yeah.
that only came from a couple of guys in Glasgow Life, whereas, you know, and they said put the Pearce Institute in, there's some text about the Pearce Institute, but if those sort of products involved the outcome of these sort of discussions and people had much more ownership on it, then all the better. And the other reason is I'm reading Soil and Soul at the moment by Alistair McIntosh, so I'm just very tuned into this sort of thing at the moment. I think it's fantastic.
Well, Bob's
But I think, you know, the thing is why Glasgow
ownership.
Life engage, you know, I mean, it's what we were speaking about earlier, you know, that ordnance survey maps, you know, we're creating an open source map. Why are we not making ordnance survey do what we're doing?
Yeah.
You know, why, that's
Yeah,
why,
that's right.
you know, why is that map no containing community thing?
One of the things, particularly in all that I read about sustainability, is that the key job now is about connecting everybody up. That is the job of our time, is about making lots of connections and opening ourselves up and being hospitable and sharing and you know, that approach where before we've been like, oh yeah, who are you and what to do? Just being like, okay, how can we, you know, there's this notion. So brilliant that you've brought that up, because perhaps you're our bridge to connect with Glasgow Life and say, here, the next time you're doing a series of maps, how about doing something like this or this? And wouldn't that be great, because it would tick all of those boxes.
As well as engaging.
Yeah, it's, you know, so.
I think it's a very interesting question you raised about the extent to which people's sort of life chances are might be affected by the spatial awareness and the mapping. And I'm thinking of the you know, the Race Online campaign that Martha Lane Fox is running, which is about how people might be getting left behind if they are not engaging with IT and getting those sort of chances. I think it'd be very interesting to have more exploration of the extent to which a geographical awareness does open up better life chances or not. I mean, it gets at the obviously then a philosophical question as to whether it's right to influence people in whether they get that capability or not. But I'm not aware that there's to what extent that has been researched. And
it would be good to find that, wouldn't it? It would be good to find, because I also think about what the heritage of a lot of the folk in Govan is. They come from the Highlands, the current the folk that are like struggling, and in the Highlands, folk would have they just walked everywhere and they knew the routes, and so the notion of like the Ordnance Survey will send some people out to survey a hill, so you've got 2 or 3 people climbing that hill and going down the other side. I mean, in the Highlands, to get anywhere, everyone was walking everywhere, so everyone was roaming and knowing and standing up on the top and understanding over there, and being connected in a way that in the city. And one of the things I wondered about in the city, because I believe the law was passed in Glasgow at the early 1900s, which made it illegal to run in the street. And so I wonder as well how those kind of notions of limiting your kind of your physical embodiment, engagement with begin to cut down on your sense of ownership or identity to a place. But I'm with you. I want to see if I can find anything where people have done that and
well, there's another very interesting perspective there that in history there might have been this awareness that's now been lost in cities. That's very interesting.
But I suppose, if you look at European history for the last 600 years or whatever, we invent the compass, we draw the maps, we go out and conquer the world, So maps are power. The people that draw the maps are the people who have the power. So obviously if you draw your own maps, you can take some of that power.
The IT thing's quite interesting as well, because I imagine that IT is very low on people's agenda in Govan. I mean, we're talking about a community where the research at UCL is a million miles away from the daily life in Govan, and it's just finding that bridge between, or not making them think you need a computer to do this. That's why I thought that map laid out on the Pearce Institute floor is a fantastic way to start to engage people. And maps are far more than just a display on an iPad or something. And people, as soon as they start saying, well, to do this you need this, you've lost half the people in Govan. So it's sort of the mapping instinct, if you like, is there, but the means of delivery has got to be something quite different in a community like that.
Yeah, I'm far less familiar with Govan generally than Susan is, but I also do work with a social justice movement called So We Stand, and there are several activists in that group who have been very politically active for decades, and these are people who travel when they can and members of various movements and extremely well read, but a lot of them live on benefits of a few £100 a month. They don't have the internet, or they go to the library and then the library in their community is closed because of cuts. So I'm trying to email people and they'll say, I'm sorry, I got back to you 4 weeks later, I couldn't get online. It's a reality. Yeah.
I think you have to watch that be all and end all thing. But we talked about that CAN thing. Bob has mentioned that CAN. The kind of educational films. There's about 10,000 films about basic arithmetic to science and all sorts of stuff like that. And Bill Gates, Bill Gates Foundation funds it and stuff. And I was watching the wee Google thing, the wee TED thing, and the guy was going on about this is the way education's going. Where teachers will be seen as kind of helpers and guiders, and you're going, alarm bells, and you're kind of thinking if we put all our money in the one bag here, it's not going to happen. We could, the same thing about. I was interviewing a person that says, but what did we do a few years ago when we didn't have the internet? How did you organise meetings? How did you do this? How did you do? And it happened. People just phoned each other up, and you bumped out in the pub. You did this. Well, that technology is one way of going about things, but we must be careful we don't lose the others. The direction, speaking to people and stuff like that.
For me, that comes back again to the quality of the interaction. And guys did a study. He's at Glasgow. Did a study on looking at community engagement and 3 different types of process. So the community planning process was very structured here. A process in Amsterdam which was much more like from the grassroots. and more sort of free form, and a process in Italy which was a very specific set of days to deal with a set of agendas. And everyone complained, everyone wanted the grass on the other side. So the people in here wanted it to be more freeform, and the people in Amsterdam wanted it to be more structured, and the folk in Italy said, oh, that's great, but actually there was all these other things we wanted to deal with. And he had been looking at, well, what makes the difference? And it's the what he's called communicative capacity. So it's the ability for a human being to stand with another one and say, okay, what do you know? Who are you? How can we work together? And that is essential. All of the other tools are only as useful as that process, so yeah, absolutely do physical stuff. We were talking about that day because it was a beautiful sunny day, and we were doing the mapping in the hall, and we're like, oh, you could do it on the square out here, and then you'd have all those folk involved.
Yeah.
But you had something.
Yeah, what did you actually do with the points of interest that you gathered that day? What did you just do with them? Were the primary school and the nursery? What happened to that data?
Sorry?
The data you gathered, what happened to that?
The sort of bits of paper and tape and all that? Well, what we didn't show on the slide was in the McLeod Hall at the Pierce, there's a balcony, quite a high balcony, and we had a dedicated video camera every minute of the use of that space. So we have this we had ambitions for almost, if there was quite a few people, it would almost be a sense of a sort of time-lapse photography, watching this Govan map sort of spill out over the floor. But over the course of the day, there's maybe 25, 30 people total who use the space. So you'd have 2 people come in for 20 minutes and another person come in. So we have the whole map, and there is a sense that it's developed, and you can actually, recalling the day, you can see where a family unit would come in and go, well, there's nothing over here, we live over here, and they'd spend a half an hour filling in, a half a mile radius of their neighborhood. So we've got the videography, we've got still photos, and then we essentially just took all of the bits of paper and sort of divided them into sort of categories and shipped all that off to New York, and we'll see what happens.
So yeah, this guy, he's an artist and a
Yeah.
cartographer or something, and we're not.
He works at the Parsons School of Design in New York.
What's his name?
Stephen Metz, who I've only met on Skype. Speaking of technology and mediation.
Yeah, and he's gonna do something.
Yeah.
And then we're gonna.
But as you said, I think the process is more important, and whatever output, at least as far as I'm concerned, is really a sort of experiment. And if nothing were to come of it, well, that would be.
There was that family that was there. There was 2 parents and the wee lassie. And
Yeah, they stayed.
I'm sure they only come in for 10 minutes, to do the. And they just couldn't get out of the place, They kept going, I have to go to the shop.
Yeah.
That's
So
no
it's
way
just
of
a
big.
fantastic tool for that.
They were
Yeah.
just there. They were
The
there.
dad was saying, I've got to go, we've got the car up on blocks, I'm supposed to be rebuilding the car. I'm like, no, Dad, no, you're staying, you can fix the car some
And it
other
was
day."
young people engaging with their parents as well, because obviously their parents knew where a lot of places were that they hadn't really.
And just on that note, there was an older woman with her friends who stayed for a long time, talked a lot about the social life. So, over here there'd be a dance, there'd be a church dinner, etc. And then she pointed out in the McLeod Hall, that radiator is where I used to sit during the dances. So we put a piece of paper there, so the physical space actually was incorporated into the map. And I said, oh, you sat on a bench over there. No, I sat on the radiator because my legs were always cold. So we had this sort of integration of the space of the mapping and then the broader representation of the mapping. It was really great.